Well, hello there, and welcome to the 162nd edition of DF Direct Weekly, our weekly show where we discuss the latest gaming and technology news. And we've got so much to talk about this week. Obviously, it's been gigaton central in terms of news stories. Joining me first of all, returning from vacation, it's John Linneman. Hello.
Hey guys, it's been a month, I think, since I've been here. So you guys have kept it running really well, though. The show's been great. Probably better without me, to be honest. But I'm happy to be back. And this is the last time you're going to see the LG CX in the background there because it's getting replaced.
Wow!
So,
oh boy!
We'll find out more about that soon.
Good. And Alex Battaglia, hello.
Yes, this week I after moving on from the plague or leprosy or whatever it was last
Ebola.
week, as Rich joked about, it was Ebola. I'm now feeling better. My throat is good, and I come to you bearing a Gainward 7800 GT from NVIDIA, which will hopefully bless this podcast so that it is less tainted.
I have no idea.
Well, I have a Casio FX 8500G right here.
Oh gosh. Is that a? Can you write dirty words in it, John?
Yes. If you type 800873555, you're good.
I know that word.
Rich said enough because unfortunately the fire in the background there is not just for show this week.
Let's crack on, shall we? First news story of the week. Obviously, we've got to talk about this, although we don't really want to because it's profoundly depressing. But how can you describe this? Microsoft seems to be hell-bent on destroying its own credibility, and it continues with the closure of various studios from Bethesda Games. So just looking at the headlines here, 3 studios under ZeniMax Media are being shut down. Arkane Austin, creators of Prey, Redfall, it's been shut down. AlphaDog Games is gone. And most shockingly of all, I think, to many people, Tango Gameworks, creators of The Evil Within, and most recently, the rightly celebrated Hi-Fi Rush has been shut down as well. Roundhouse Studios is being folded into ZeniMax Online to create more Elder Scrolls Online content, I assume. Apparently some members of Arkane Austin are being moved on to other studios. But ultimately, John, this is the scenario which we never thought would happen because the narrative was that Game Pass requires a rich diversity of games, and in acquiring Bethesda Game Studios with all of those studios creating a rich diversity of games, well, it's a perfect partnership, right? But lo and behold, it's game over for the likes of Tango Gameworks and Arkane Austin, most primarily, which is inconceivable and unfathomable almost. Thoughts?
Yeah, it's a strange and sad situation. You say we never thought it could happen, but there's been a lot of suspicion over the years, both from us internally, from developers we've spoken with, and just general that Game Pass as a model, it's going to be difficult to sustain it. So I always kind of had a suspicion that some developers might close over this. The thing is, though, is I don't think any of us expected them to be these developers. I can kind of see why someone might look at the Redfall situation and want to close Arkane. But Hi-Fi Rush has been a dramatic hit for Microsoft. It's the kind of shot in the arm that Xbox really needed, right? And based, as far as we can tell, it almost seems like because these two companies just happened to be quote unquote between projects, like they shipped their games last year, they were pitching new ideas and it was ready, that I could imagine someone saying, well, it's going to take a game's amount of time to develop a new game. So, let's get rid of them now. But no, the whole thing to me, so there was this post from Brad Hildebrand, who was previously a PR and comms leader at Microsoft and EA, I suppose. And he noted that 2 things. First of all, obviously the Game Pass stuff, which we can possibly get more into, but that can be difficult to sustain if Game Pass itself is not growing at the rate that it needs to grow. And it does seem as though numbers have somewhat stagnated in recent months, which makes things difficult, especially when you say something like Hi-Fi Rush, you put that out on Game Pass, it does well, but it only kind of floats around at the top for like a month. And this is what Brad was suggesting. And then it kind of sinks back into the list of games there. The games that kind of stick around are those that are more multiplayer focused, I guess. The things that have a community where people continue to play it. So a game like this kind of falls off a cliff, and it maybe didn't get the same upfront sales that it would have gotten on its own. Although, unfortunately, in this day and age, a game selling like this is probably not the easiest. And as we've seen, it hasn't exactly lit up the sales charts on PS5 either. But the bigger thing seems to be, as he suggests, like 3 or 4 years ago, he says the Xbox was basically a rounding error on the Microsoft books, which that's a bit hyperbolic, I would say, but it's fair to say that Microsoft being the world's richest company, I think right now,
probably, yeah.
They, something like Xbox division, the way it was running probably was something that they could kind of keep going and realistically keep running without necessarily demanding the same types of returns and on investment that you might normally expect. But when they shelled out $70 billion for Activision, it's kind of feels like perhaps Satya and them and shareholders and the like suddenly turn their gaze. It's like, now you've spent a ridiculous amount of, I guess it's not like they're forking out the cash. There's a lot more to it than that, but this makes Xbox a much more expensive proposition to operate. And a lot of the decisions as of late, from the multi-platform stuff to what's happening here and potential ideas for the future, to me, it feels like decisions driven not by the Xbox people, but like the people above the Xbox people, right? You saw how gleeful Satya was when they talked about the multi-platform stuff recently. I mean, none of this stuff like brand loyalty, console wars, all the stuff that they've kind of fostered over the year within Xbox, he does not give a shit about any of that. Obviously, he's there. The man is there to make money, and Xbox was not exactly it. It's in third place, right? It has been in third place for a long time at this point, and now they spend a ton of money on it. So it's time to change things, and I feel like this is all part of the change that they want to go through. And I suspect that we're looking at a complete change to the Xbox strategy that will possibly end in like the Xbox as a dedicated console going away, becoming something else. I don't think they're going away as a business, but I think it's going to completely shift. And along with that sort of like harsh businessman mentality, I think it's possible that studios with that have shown themselves to just be creative and successful on the mindshare front probably don't interest him that much. And so for those investors and those top people to sort of slash those away, because if you just look at the numbers, like, okay, they shipped games. Now you're going to have to invest X amount of money for however many years, 3 to 5 years probably, before a new product is ready for them to release. So that's a huge investment there. Perhaps that's what they looked at then. They're like, well, we don't really need to do this right now. We have plenty of other things, and we're making cuts. So, I mean, that's just my scatterbrained attempt at sort of putting together things like Brad said, and also looking at, considering my own thoughts on the matter. But it just seems like business has caught up with it, and they're changing strategy. And these studios, unfortunately, got caught in that crossfire.
It does seem like strategy is being changed on the hoof, as it were, because clearly there's a lot of pushback within Microsoft because there's a lot of leaks, and the leaks do seem credible, and they do seem to change on an almost monthly basis now, based on the new stuff that actually seems to be happening internally that nobody can quite get their head around. I think ultimately there's a profound leadership issue here. And I can illustrate that quite easily. The announcement came as a shock, I think, primarily because all of the communication from the key leadership people at Xbox over the last few years is entirely at odds with this decision, right? So, I guess maybe it's a good thing and a bad thing that Microsoft execs are actually quite vocal. It's a good thing in that obviously you want to know what's happening at Xbox, you want to know what's going on, but it's a bad thing in that when a corporate decision is made, that is entirely at odds with your comms over the last few years, questions are then raised about the leadership. So, let's be honest here. We've got on the record quotes from the likes of Aaron Greenberg saying that Hi-Fi Rush was a mega hit that exceeded expectations. We've got quotes from Phil talking about how he supports Arkane Austin and Tango Gameworks in their creative endeavors. And, all of this is entirely at odds with the actual reality that's just unfolded before us in the last week. And suddenly the talkative execs aren't really talkative anymore, right? Which,
You see, Rich, like Sarah even posted some stuff about Tango Gameworks as recently as like a month or so ago that seemed like celebrating many more years to come. And then when you look at some of the answers, like she was interviewed, I guess, by Bloomberg.
Yeah, I saw that TV clip. Yeah, it was clown.
She didn't have an answer. It was just word salad. And based on that and like the way these guys were talking previously, to me it feels like this may have been something that surprised them as well. Because usually these things are in the works for quite a while, right? But to me it almost feels like, wait, maybe they weren't fully on board, or this just kind of came down from on high, and it's like, no, this is what's happening. It's as if the Xbox strategy that Phil that has been worked on for years, they've suddenly decided, okay, that doesn't work anymore. We're changing everything.
In which case, maybe we need another business update podcast. Although actually, maybe we don't.
Oh my goodness,
Alex.
Okay.
Obviously, you must have thoughts on this.
Yeah, for me, I agree, John, really a lot about the whole spending a lot of money on Blizzard thing, making room for Blizzard titles on Game Pass because you necessarily eat some of the revenue as a result of that would come in from the game sales. And that to make room for that on Game Pass means having less titles on Game Pass from other developers, maybe. I think that's a really, really smart thing to say, but I just want to talk about this from the aspect of maybe like in the short term, I think this is an absolute like self shot to the face. Oh, yeah. And like, it's so bad. And PR and just the way Microsoft and Xbox looks as a result, this is bad. But I also think internally, for medium to long term, this is also another hardcore self-own, because you're getting rid of a lot of institutionalized knowledge and like structures of how to make a game to studios. I think Tango has shown that they're really good at putting out actually. They've put out in the last couple of years a number of titles, so they obviously know how to make games in a semi-expedient manner, and they're unique and different. I would say, their last two titles were very different from one another. You can have your own opinion on them, but they did produce two unique titles that were of a higher quality, especially Hi-Fi Rush, I would say. And they proved that they could do that. And then that's all gone. And I think Microsoft, ever since they canned and destroyed all of their internal studios and went full Call of Duty, Madden, TV cooler, and then they tried to rebuild that up after Xbox One kind of started up. And that was the whole initiative of Phil. They made the initiative. They've been fostering studios, buying studios since then. And I feel like this is the medium to long-term self-own here, where they get rid of their ability to create multiple new and interesting games over time that get people talking about Xbox as a brand by destroying this institutionalized knowledge and structure and workforce that is there by closing these studios. And I don't see exactly the strategy of that part, considering they've had such a hard time about getting out high quality games from a variety of studios. Like 343 has floundered. I'm going to say that Turn 10's most recent outing with Forza has been a huge problem and a disappointment. And other studios, some are better than others. Obsidian's doing pretty great, but they have problems getting out games that people talk about, and they start having that, and then they just immediately get rid of it. So I think in the medium to long term, I don't actually feel very confident as a result of this that Microsoft is going to put out quality games if they just are so comfortable with getting rid of people who make good games. So this is a very disappointing thing for me.
That's an interesting point, Alex. It does seem like they really have a problem with studio management right now. You hear constantly the drama going on in the background.
There were reported comments from Matt Booty about concerning the ZeniMax closures that, there wasn't really enough infrastructure to support that many studios. Which
why buy them all?
Which is obviously that's the point to make, right? Why buy them all? And even so, there has been a lot of failure. The whole Halo Infinite saga, Forza arriving in a state that was a bit disappointing, and with a game concept that was kind of based on live service.
Everything we've heard about the Perfect Dark project.
Not
not
my
good.
gosh.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there's a lot of issues there, and basically there were periods where it's kind of like a chicken and egg situation. Game Pass grows by having a continuous stream of great games, and those games didn't arrive or were delayed, and so there's this kind of massive beast that needs to be fed that wasn't being fed, and now we have these issues with growth on Game Pass. Maybe things will change this year because they've still got a lot of big games coming, starting with Hellblade 2 that's arriving very, very soon. But I don't know. I don't think you can look at Hellblade 2 as a kind of AAA tentpole. It's not that kind of game. It seems to be cast in the same mold as the original, which is to say it's going to be great, it's going to be pretty awesome, but it's not a AAA juggernaut as such.
I hope they don't assign that value to it, because I would be really worried if they're like, oh yeah, this is the next big AAA thing, and then it's Hellblade, because that's not what Hellblade was really designed to be, and those expectations probably would not be met.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I just think going back to the leadership thing, obviously there's all of these studios that are now a part of Microsoft looking at this, not hearing convincing rationale from leadership and wondering if they're next. I mean, I'm going to actually go to a couple of points raised by supporters on this, and let's go straight to the thing that's been concerning me. Thomas Trala says, "Hey DF team, I know we're all wondering which studio is next on the MS chopping block. Do you think Double Fine is safe? Their documentary showed Microsoft coming in and saving the day when they were out of money, so that would definitely be awful if they decided to shut them down. And this one from Zephyr, are the recent closings a warning from Microsoft to their other studios? Does Double Fine need to create the latest, greatest looter extraction shooter or else? I mean, that's not what you want to see. But, there's just this massive wave of uncertainty that's now amongst gamers, it's amongst the press, and it must surely be amongst the studios now. And, when we look at some of the rationale that we have seen about the closure of the ZeniMax studios, there was talk of concentrating on bigger, potentially more successful projects, which kind of, suggests a doubling down on key IP. But then again, we had another quote from Matt Booty talking about smaller, prestigious premium games, which is Hi-Fi Rush. And they've closed that studio down. There's just no clear messaging going on here.
To be fair though, Rich, to interject on that, the staff on Hi-Fi Rush, it seems to have been a large game in terms of, now obviously it includes like PR and everything, but the Moby Games link, it lists like 1,500 something people that were involved in Hi-Fi Rush overall. And I think it took up, this was some of the early pre-production stuff, but it was like 5 years in development.
Well, they sold it for $30. So it's not a $70 a game. So therefore, I would class it as a smaller scale project.
But maybe it needed to be. I don't know.
Not that it would have sold.
I wouldn't have sold at 70. I don't think, unfortunately, even though it deserves it. But it still seems like it took a large amount of time to make and a decent amount of people to make it. I would maybe classify it more as like a medium large kind of game. I mean, classifying games in that way is difficult anyway, but it's definitely not like a small project, I would say.
Well, do you think that's what Matt Booty meant? Because you're not going to, a small project that delivers.
I think Matt Booty doesn't know what the heck he's talking about. He even gets the names of studios wrong when addressing them in an official email. How insulting is that? That's just pathetic.
Yeah. Talking about though, like the future, where do you think in the short to medium term, from a PR perspective, how do you think Microsoft even attempts to recover from this? Because in the very short term, these the Cerebon non-quotes, the Matt Booty, also not good things that are said. Like, how do you come out of this at all and start looking forward and actually making progress to being successful again?
Right now, though, it's all going to come down to what's happening at the E3, well, quote unquote E3 showcase that's happening just a few short weeks from now. I just find it really challenging for, the format of that is essentially for the execs to come out and introduce games. But these are the execs which are now kind of discredited by their own words and the actions of Xbox. How are they going to produce a show like that? Do they just pretend none of this has happened? Do they focus on the positives? What is Xbox?
They need to do both. I think they need to somehow address this. Just coming out and pretending like nothing's changed would be a huge mistake for them. But I do think they also need to focus on the positive. And I mean, frankly, I think the shift that we're going to see is that Microsoft wants to become just a large publisher that also happens to produce some sort of bespoke hardware that is perhaps more PC-like, and they will abandon the traditional console market.
Right.
And I think that the shift was never going to be easy. I think they've done it horribly. They've done a very bad job with messaging around this. But I think that's probably the type of shift that we're looking at and the thing that they need to slowly work towards. But obviously this has really shaken a lot of confidence, I think, in their future, even as a publisher, because, man, the thing is you said this in the chat, Rich, but I thought it was funny. You said that it feels more as if Activision has acquired Microsoft, or Xbox, I should say, rather than the other way around. Yeah. And these types of decisions feel especially Activision. They were the kings of funneling everybody to their cash cow projects at the expense of everything else, either shutting down or moving studios all into the Call of Duty mines, stuff like that. And this is the first time we're seeing in a while, I guess, Microsoft kind of do that as well. It feels like, where they're kind of suddenly taking that approach. I mean, we'll see, but
right.
I mean, I think that they can get back to a point where they're making good money, because if they're able to produce games and they just become a normal multi-platform publisher that also has their hardware, I think they'll be fine. It's just that the spirit of Xbox will probably be lost, and that is not good.
So your contention is that Microsoft will turn into like a mega publisher, which some might say they are already with these acquisitions.
But
we've got the rather fascinating scenario now that Sea of Thieves is doing great on PlayStation 5. That could apply to all games. I wouldn't be surprised to see Forza Horizon 5 appear on PlayStation soon. It's had a good run on Xbox, and why not extend it? It's still a state-of-the-art game, and why not? If that works, then why not extend it to all games? I just wonder, you're kind of starting to lose your identity at that point if you're, if you don't have a hardware base to rally around. So your idea, John, is essentially that Microsoft would produce what you might call a reference device, which isn't designed to sell in the multi-millions, but is like an Xbox that would play Game Pass games great, that would hold up as a decent PC, that would allow you to access other marketplaces. Is that what you're thinking about?
That's my thoughts, actually. Like I think that they look at something like the Steam Deck and think, maybe this model is good for us. I mean, they have Windows. Valve is obviously pushing Steam Deck running Linux, but if they can offer something that's Windows based, has Xbox, has Game Pass, but also can run something like Steam on there, various other things, basically create more of a PC like device that almost gets back to what they wanted in the first place when the Xbox project began, right? Right. It was just that core team that pushed them to not do that at the time. But I think hardware and software is in a place now where that actually could work. And I think that's just going to shift the way things mean. But that would also mean, I think, like you said, Rich, that would imply that actual Xbox games are no longer made.
Right. That's my concern, because,
but it's Microsoft gaming now, it all becomes Microsoft gaming. The Xbox brand is just like, it's just part of them, but it's not like the central focus of their gaming efforts anymore.
I'm concerned about this, because I do think you need a device that is basically the focal point of your efforts, right? It's all very well going multi-platform.
They've had that though, and it hasn't worked.
Well, what else
been
hasn't
like
11
years.
Game Pass PC arguably hasn't worked. It hasn't delivered the kind of explosive growth that Microsoft wanted by expanding the platform outwards.
I think, interestingly, you look at this week was also the week where we got a glimpse at Nintendo's profit numbers, I guess. And it turns out that they've made more during the Switch years than every other year since like 1980 or something combined. They are making a lot of money. Nintendo is also a company that is releasing a lot of games, and many of them are very small scale. They don't even internally develop them all, but they do fund and publish them. And you also aren't seeing a lot of closing of studios. You aren't seeing big layoffs or anything like that. There's more to it. Obviously, it's a complicated situation, especially with Japanese law. But I think the difference there is that, obviously they have a war chest of money to begin with, but they've made a lot of smart investments in terms of how they produce things. They haven't really chased the same super AAA highs that we've seen in the other industry, even though they do have some big AAA releases, such as the Zelda games. But they've also they've continued to respect the value of their games. And I know this burns people up. The pricing on Nintendo games, they almost never go on discount. They're not on subscription services, all that kind of stuff. But it also means, and I've even caught myself in this mentality, when a new game hits and it's a Nintendo game, I'm very likely to just buy it right away. Even if I don't have time at the moment, it's just like, okay, I'll just get it now because it's not going to be on sale possibly ever, or you know what I mean? Or like it'll be years until it's on sale. With every other game on every other platform, it's going to be on sale soon, and it always is. So there's no point in buying on day one, especially as a physical game collector. Like I usually do not buy modern, PS5 or Xbox games day one if I'm getting the disc version, because it's going to get cheaper really soon, and it always does. This is race to the bottom, the race to subscriptions, the race, get all that quote unquote value, and that is technically good for the consumers' wallets, but it also has been like sort of reducing, I feel like, the inherent value of the games, like the perception of what games are worth. And you can say, well, phone gaming, the free to play stuff, that's also challenging it. And it is, but somehow Nintendo has managed to find this balance between keeping budgets in check on these games across a wide spectrum, and also like respecting the value of their games. And again, I know people aren't going to like that aspect because the price, it does make it less affordable, one could say, but it does seem to be working for them. And their games perform, even when it's just simple little stuff like that Mario versus Donkey Kong remake. Like, what the heck? Just there it is. It's good. It's technically competent. It is exactly what it says on the tin. But you ain't going to see the price dropping very low on that anytime soon. It is what it is.
How do you think Microsoft can come back from this? Because, I was speaking to various people, and the perception right now is that this is on par, if not worse, than the Xbox One TV situation, which kind of tanked the brand. Somebody else I spoke to when said a similar thing, but said, well, actually, they were selling games at that point, but they're not now.
Right.
Suggesting it was a lot worse. Where do you think they should go next, Alex?
Well, I'm going to be extremely pessimistic and just say it doesn't matter, because, John kind of showed or just described like a very different future for Xbox a little bit ago in this conversation, where it is more about just being a large multi-platform publisher and the brand dies. And from my perspective as a PC gamer, I don't care if the Xbox brand dies. I don't doesn't affect me. I just kind of want to play games. And as long as they produce good games, I'm fine with that. So I'm not attached to this, but I feel like I don't actually see a very good way out of this situation, because the hardware is not selling. Game Pass is stagnating in the current form, and the signal from this decision is that the current model that we described through communication from our higher ups the last couple of years is not the model actually that we're going to be pursuing, or it's radically changed. So I feel like I don't know, maybe this is actually the moment of extreme departure, and we're going to be seeing in the next to near future a very different looking Xbox in the manner that John described it. So maybe this is actually, maybe there isn't a way out of this, and maybe this is just the new futures now, and it's going to start.
John, surely the way out of this is just great games, right? And they do have a good lineup for the rest of the year.
I mean, in terms of consumer mind share, sure. I mean, the games will help, but I guess what this situation has done is that it now creates this this feeling of uncertainty within them, where if you're a fan of the platform, making a good game isn't enough, and it can just, end the studio. Right. And that does matter to at least the hardcore. But I'll be curious to see how much this actually impacts the average consumer in terms of like what they know about Xbox going forward. Right. Because the 2013 debacle was something that even just like people that paid just a little bit of attention to the games market, they knew about this. They knew about what happened with the Xbox One. It got out there into the public sphere. Will this do the same? I'm not so sure about that. So while it does seem like a pretty big thing, and I do think it's going to shake the confidence in it, I think it may not matter that much for them in the end if they just, for the types of plans that they're going after. But it definitely hurts the fans' connection to the brand. I mean, you see a lot of the hardcore Xbox fans out there, and there's ups and downs with the fan stuff, but man, that community, they are hurting right now. And I don't like to see everybody getting just like pile driven into the ground by business decisions. We've seen it before. I mean, I enjoyed Nintendo during the Wii U years, for instance, and that was not a kind time for Nintendo fans. But, Nintendo does have that elasticity where they're able to kind of come and go. They have these periods where they do terribly, and then they snap back and they take over the world.
Well, I think from my perspective, there's still a massive leadership issue here. You've got this really bad news to put out there, and basically none of the execs want to talk about it. They're very, very talkative prior to that, but when the bad news comes, it just seems they disappear. You just get these weird comments, reported via hearsay almost. All of the stuff from Matt Booty came from reports of what he told people internally. The only external comms I can see was the Bloomberg interview with Sarah Bond, which, let's face facts, is a car crash. Didn't even answer the question properly. And there's no clear messaging to the studios that are working with Xbox what happens next. There's no clear messaging to the gamers, who are invested in Xbox, what's happening next. Why did this happen? Sarah Bond's public response seemed to be it's about the long-term health of the business. Is Xbox losing money? I don't think it is. Game Pass still has a huge amount of subscribers. Let's talk about Game Pass just finally here, because obviously there's a lot of question marks surrounding the viability of the model. And we had a report recently. Microsoft has reaffirmed its commitment to day one for all of its top-tier titles on Game Pass.
Including Call of Duty?
Well, there wasn't a specific call-out for Call of Duty, but it was just saying that's the plan. But yes, we also had that report from Tom Warren of The Verge where people are asking internally, whoa, hold on a minute. Are we going to tank Call of Duty revenues by putting it on Game Pass. And that is a question which was probably never even, when I think back to the D After X special we did when this acquisition was first mooted, it was like, well, this is going to produce massive growth for Game Pass. It will probably work. It will still be on the other platforms. But now there's this big question mark over Game Pass and its growth, the viability of its growth. John, do you think this is sustainable? Do you think it will go day one on Game Pass?
Oh, I don't know yet on that, but I don't think it's sustainable. Not with and so this is a larger industry problem right now, but I think just the budgets of games, the amount of time they take to develop, it's significant. The investment requirements are so large that even with a company like Microsoft trying to fund all of that and then Game Pass becoming like the primary means of delivering that content, I just don't see how the numbers work there.
Right.
And, I feel like there is a risk you put something like Call of Duty on there that the subscription numbers you may gain from it will not offset the loss in revenue that you would have gained by normal packaged or digital, whatever, like normal sales of the product. Activision famously did not want their Call of Duty games on Game Pass, right? And I feel like now that they have those numbers, perhaps it will become clear that, oh yeah, we probably shouldn't do that, which then again calls into the whole question of how well this service can actually work. And how long, it's just, I just don't know. And also you look at this, like the idea I think was like, oh yeah, the big tentpole releases will fuel growth, which will then push people to play the other smaller games as well. And then we can use that to fund those studios. And that seems like not to be working out. And then obviously Call of Duty, man, the risk though of that is just insane because like, I feel like, let's say they try it goes on Game Pass and it doesn't work and they lose a lot of money. What do they do next? Do they walk it back the next year? That would anger so many people and it would absolutely put a stake through the heart of Game Pass. I feel like people would feel betrayed by that. Right.
Yeah.
So, but then if they don't do it, it also puts into question, like, wait, what about the day one Game Pass stuff? They now have a very difficult question to answer. And I can't say that I have a lot of faith in them answering that question correctly at this point, based on things that have been transpiring. So I don't know, man. What do you guys think?
Alex, what do you think?
Well, it's hard. The Activision Call of Duty thing, like John just said, I think it's hard to know what Microsoft's going to do there when the time comes, which is just a couple months from now, I guess. So
more than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know when the next Call of Duty comes out. November,
it'll be like
maybe?
November usually.
Yeah, so I guess we'll know then. But for the rest of the longer medium term stuff, I also am going to very much so question the viability of Game Pass longer term, just because beyond Activision Blizzard, I don't know. I'm feeling this has shook my confidence so much regarding it. Like I wasn't super confident about it before, but I at least thought like maybe Microsoft has a good idea about how it's working. But since this flies in the face of what the model that it seems like they were proposing, I'm less confident overall. And I look at the catalog of games coming out, and yes, I'm very excited for Indiana Jones. A little bit muted on Hellblade. Very interested to see what the Coalition's going to do, but the last Gears game, it's being Xbox driven and the Xbox platform isn't necessarily growing. And that's the primary area where you get your Game Pass subscribers. I don't know. I'm not sure if they have a big enough catalog of super high profile games to drive Game Pass growth to an area where they feel like it's ultra profitable and what they want, and to maintain it over long term. I really lack the confidence now that is the way things are going to shake out. But I am just a person sitting in an armchair here. Obviously analyzing something.
One might have assumed that when they made this acquisition, they did actually run the numbers and did some projections. How accurate they are now, though, we don't know. I mean, certainly this is like purely anecdotal and purely personal. But, we reached the point now. I think the tipping point for me personally was when Disney Plus upped its subscription from like 80 to like £130, I think. And it was at that point where not only did I cancel Disney Plus because, I just don't watch it enough. I also then started to look at everything else that I've subscribed to over the months and the years, and
I did this.
and just applied the scythe to stuff where I just don't see the value anymore. So at the moment, I've got Amazon, which is just mostly for the shopping side of things. I don't really watch it that much, and Netflix because the family watch it. Everything else is gone, and I think it's a kind of. How can you describe it? Just kind of like people are starting to realize the effect on their finances that all of these subscriptions are having. And it doesn't matter where they are, whether it's in games, whether it's in TV and media, that sort of thing. People are being a lot more selective now, and they're realizing the financial hit that cumulatively all those services are having. So I can see that as being an obstacle to Game Pass growth. The Call of Duty thing, well, we'll just have to wait and see there. I'm not sure whether they have existing marketing arrangements with Sony that still persist for this year or not. I don't see any reason why the existing catalogue of Activision games couldn't be added to Game Pass, mind you, which I think would be fantastic. The question is, when's it going to happen? It happened in pretty short order after the Bethesda acquisition. Not so with Activision, so I'm wondering whether there's complexities which we're not aware of there that's stopping that from happening. But, I'm just looking at all of these supporter questions, and I think the thing that, that sort of hits me is just that there's no positive spin, no sort of counter argument being made against this that makes any sense. In fact, there's no counter arguments at all coming through. There's just anger, dismay, disappointment, and I think that's been reflected online from developers, from gamers. This is not being seen as a good thing. It's certainly being seen as a worrying thing, and there's no reassurance, no messaging from Xbox leadership about why this is happening and what's going to happen next.
That's wild. That's
kind of baffling, isn't it? Because, as I said previously, they've been all too eager to share the successes, but when things are not looking so great, they're going missing.
Dude, it's wild this year. Like with those multi-platform rumors earlier this year, they just kind of let that fire burn for weeks, it felt like, before they came out and said anything. This is happening. Like, what's going on over there in terms of just messaging?
Yeah,
it seems dire.
It all looks like strategy being made on the hoof. Just sort of changing on a month by month basis.
Maybe it actually is.
Well, you were talking about the Satya Nadella comments, and it's quite interesting that until the ABK deal, he didn't really seem to talk about Xbox at all.
He never talked about Xbox, did he?
But I think you're quite right, John. The acquisitions, the scale of ABK in particular, has basically put them on the radar.
In the crosshair.
Yeah, and it's not looking great.
Oh, gosh.
It's time to start earning like Office.
Well, look, there's a lot more questions that we could ask about this and where things go next, but ultimately we're just commentating based on a void of information. There's just very little.
The next Xbox is going to be AI driven. Bam.
It's bam.
I'm just very worried about the future of Xbox if they don't have a strong platform to build around. If it is just going to be PC ports, they've got to have the infrastructure in place to make that happen. And the QA drastically needs to improve. If they can bring some of the QA that goes into console releases more generally to PC, fine, but that's kind of not the way that platform operates. I've got big concerns about that. We could go on for hours about this, and basically our supporter Q&A this week was, we'll still do it, but there's the vast majority of comments here. I mean, it's just depressing to read them. So I think we should probably move on to our next topic. Okay, second news story of the week, and amazing news, everyone. Nintendo has actually confirmed that there is going to be a Switch successor after denying it for so long, literally denying it even when they were showing it at Gamescom. They have announced that there will be an announcement for their next generation system within this financial year, which I believe takes us up to April 25. So they've said, yes, we'll announce something in the next year. There was an investor call which did follow up with some details, and it's interesting just in the way it's been positioned here. So, for example, it's being described as a successor to the Switch, which, on the face of it, duh. But when you sort of compare it to previous announcements, I'm looking at a tweet thread here from Oatmeal Dome. Yes, Nintendo says the next generation Switch will be a quote-unquote successor to the Switch, but when you look at what they described their previous machines as, Switch, new hardware with a brand new concept, Wii U, a system to succeed Wii, 3DS, new portable game machine to succeed the Nintendo DS system, which kind of it sort of suggests that we're getting another Switch, right? There are some various technical details that have also emerged through some sleuthing on the Famiboards forum, but we'll get onto that in a minute. John, thoughts on the actual Nintendo disclosures?
I mean, it's rather unlike them, I guess, to address this stuff usually, but it does feel very modern Nintendo to just sort of share a little bit of information, but ultimately say very little, because none of this is a surprise, right? But it's, at least to me, it almost feels like they're saying stop asking us about this. Our upcoming presentations are not about this. Yes, there's something coming. Just wait. You know what I mean? It feels like it's coming from a place of impatience, just to settle down. Maybe the fans, shareholders, everyone.
You're quite relax. Right, John, because the announcement that was made was basically a non-announcement. We are not going to be announcing the Switch successor at our June Nintendo
exactly. Direct. It's don't expect it. It's not coming. But there is something, but it's not ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts on this?
The successor thing is curious because to just pull an old historical thing. Well, what's the gimmick? Is the proposition of a more powerful Switch, but it just does all the Switch things, just with better graphics and potentially higher frame rate. Is that enough of a selling point to differentiate it enough from the previous product to make people buy it that have already bought it before, and also to get a new audience to grow a bit? I don't know how important that is for a Japanese company, the whole new audience thing. But so from the description of it as a successor, it seems like it is more iterative as a result. But then I go back and I look at the Wii U, and they did try a gimmick there. It was very unsuccessful for the larger selling of consoles part. But I'm curious to see if there's something like the Wii U, or are we getting it to get a GameCube kind of situation where the GameCube is just a really good console, and it's a way better N64. A way better N64, but it didn't grow and it didn't shock and awe like the Switch or the Wii did, which were radically different. So I'm very curious exactly to see if there's a Wii U gimmick in there that we still don't know about, or if this is just a GameCube. I don't know. That's curious.
Okay. You just can't say, can you? Really?
I can't say.
All of the evidence suggests that it is a successor to the Switch with a Switch-like concept, and I'm not sure how you could evolve that concept significantly when your machine has to be a mobile front and center.
They shouldn't. I think this needs to be very similar to the original Switch, because I think the Switch is the model that Nintendo always wanted.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because they've had success in handhelds and consoles, but especially handhelds. This was finally the point where they were able to combine them, and now their developers could focus on the one platform. And that turned out to be just the best possible thing for them. They're not going to walk that back. And that's great. The language though does feel guarded because the Switch has been so successful. It reminded me of when they called the DS the quote unquote third pillar, I believe, where it was like, it had this air of, this might work. We're not getting rid of the Game Boy line just yet. You know, we just have this other thing here. We're going to try it. And then when it was clear that it was a gigantic success, which did take a little bit of time, then it was like, oh yeah, we're all in on this now. You know what I mean? So maybe they're like, yeah, you know, we have another Switch kind of coming. That doesn't mean, but still buy the old Switch. It's still good. We're still making stuff for it. Because they've basically sold, they're one of the best selling consoles of all time now with the Switch. It's knocking on the door, and maybe it's surpassed the PS2 at this point. Need to double check. It's insane, those numbers. I actually didn't think it was possible to get those numbers these days. It's pretty impressive. But at the same time, and this is why I'm sure it's taking them so long, like, there's always that risk during the transition, and Nintendo famously has struggled with this. It's like, how do you actually keep that audience? How do you get them interested in that new machine? Do they feel betrayed? Like, they don't want to lose that audience, but they can't focus. They still need to move ahead somehow. So I suspect that there's a lot of concern about that strategy because the current leadership hasn't launched a new console before.
Yeah.
This is going to be their first shot at it. And they're coming off of Nintendo's most successful overall platform ever. I mean, the DS, I think, is still ahead, maybe numbers wise, but it's kind of a different thing somewhat. And you were talking about expanding the audience. That was obviously their MO for the Wii and the DS. They now have that audience, and they still have that audience. And I feel like the Switch was this perfect middle ground where it actually it appealed to both the people that love traditional games, but also the people they got during the Wii and the DS era. And it kind of brought everybody on board. So I don't know that there's necessarily that many more people to capture, and I'm not sure that they need to. Right. Nor do they want to. Like, I think they want that Nintendo audience, and I don't think they're saying, well, we got to get in and capture all of the mobile players. We got to get the free-to-play money. We got to get live service money. We need to get everybody else. They seem pretty happy with their audience type, right. And they've got their sizable niche. I say niche, I mean, it's a ton of people playing it, but it's still, when you look at the overall market and you take into things like Roblox and such, it is kind of still a little bit of a niche.
Well, we talk about expanding the audience, and I think what Nintendo did spectacularly well was to actually combine their mobile and home console audiences into one, and the results have been nothing short of exceptional. And I think that, you know, they probably did expand their overall audience because the Switch as a concept is irresistible. You know, great games that you can take anywhere. You don't need to be stuck in your living room, or, you know, you can take that machine anywhere. You can play it anywhere, even within the home, I think has huge value. So
also, just a lot of friends of mine that don't play video games much. They really aren't interested that much in video games. They all have a Switch. It's not the focus of their lifestyle or anything, but it's something where they're like, yeah, you know, I'll just play it on Switch. Like, everybody's fully aware of the Switch. They're on board with the Switch. It has that mass market like penetration that's so important to getting those numbers.
Yeah. The other thing is, it's, you know, being able to use it anywhere. It's found great utility with like parents, you know. And it's just, what can I say? It's just been remarkable to see people that I used to sort of consider gamers who drifted out of it come back in because of the Switch, and you know, the fact that it was almost, in a sense, you know, good clean fun as well. You know, the quality of Nintendo games has never really faltered. And, you know, that concept plus those games is just irresistible to those people as well. So, you know, I think you're right, John. They don't really need to do that much more with Switch 2 other than to create a more modern system, and that will carry that business model forward. And, you know, it's all going to come down to the flow of great games, which I think is going to be challenging because, as we've often said in the past, Switch effectively had the benefit of 2 generations worth of Nintendo first-party games, because the Wii U ones could just be refactored for Switch. But yeah, I guess from that we should move on to the disclosures that have come from Famiboard's detective work. These guys have been basically tracking the progress of the Switch via various leaks. And yeah, obviously there was, Linux disclosures. There was the NVIDIA leak. We did a video on the T239 processor. A lot of that sort of detective work produced that video. And the detective work continues through the form of shipping manifests, where these guys are actually tracking publicly available documents. So let's be clear here. It's not a leak, right? Nothing is being leaked. It's public. And, they've figured out the code words used for various pieces of technology, but there are some instances where T239, the main chip in Switch 2, is just described as a T239, which makes things a lot easier. But now, the recent shipping manifests have actually given like a sort of part-by-part guide to what's in the new console, and even some dimensions. So people have actually created their own sort of projected Switch 2 shells based on those dimensions. The couple of things that have come out, though, that have been highlighted is essentially that the memory subsystem seems to be better than expected. There's talk of LPDDR5X modules running at 7,500 megatransfers per second. Two of those, two 6GB modules, have been identified, which suggests 12 gigs in the final shipping unit. Also, 256 gigs of fast, I think it's UFS memory, which, that's quite interesting because, the Switch 2 is going to need something faster than traditional NAND and probably faster than SD cards as well. We've got this question here from Green Swede. Alleged Switch quote-unquote 2 leaks from manufacturing starting to pop up. Alleges will have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM. Assuming that this information is accurate, does 12 gigabytes sound like a good enough amount of RAM for developers, considering that Series X and PS5 are using 16? Would developers have to make more obvious development sacrifices for multi-platform Switch 2 releases?
Wow.
I'd say no, because 12 gigs is more than Series S. And, the bandwidth from LPDDR5X, it's going to come in at something like 128 gigs per second, assuming they're running at full speed, of course, which is actually which is not guaranteed. But that's a lot of bandwidth for that processor. And, in terms of developers who are targeting Switch specifically, they're going to work to produce the best results with what they're given. And, you can't really... Nobody's really been complaining about texture work on first-party Switch titles, so I think it'll just be fine for Switch 2. I
feel regarding the RAM, though, just even if it's not used to its full potential, it still seems like a gigantic upgrade from the original Switch, which was truly hamstrung by poor memory bandwidth and other memory-related issues, right?
Yeah.
It's good for what it is, but that is a key pain point that a lot of developers had to deal with, and this should at least alleviate that significantly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Alex, thoughts?
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about it in terms of just like Switch 2 things that we want it to do. One of the things about scaling to a higher res using DLSS is that you still actually have a pretty intense memory cost to doing it, because you want to keep the textures at the MIP level and resolution of the output resolution, and that will require more memory. And I think actually them going for more memory fits really well into the idea that Switch 2, when put in its docking base, is actually going to be scaling up to reasonable resolutions on a 4K set. I don't want to say 4K there at all, but I think this helps the situation out a lot, and I'm happy to see it. I'm also very curious as a result of the memory situation, because it is an NVIDIA processor. Like ray tracing, we know, is very expensive, but it also has a larger memory cost. And it's been one of the reasons why, for example, I think Doom Eternal is like a cited one, where I think we can say probably the Series S has the oomph to do the light ray tracing that game has from a GPU shading and compute perspective, but it probably didn't have the memory to do it without large sacrifices to things like texture quality, maybe, where it would be dubious to actually make that trade-off. And I think the Switch could like produce a better looking version of Doom Eternal than the Series S in that perspective, maybe. Who knows? But I'm very curious to see, because looking at that memory situation, we've seen such incredible compromises at times to texture quality on Series S games, like where I just go like, I don't know. I feel like they could have done better is what I feel like sometimes. But I feel like Switch could actually have a situation as a result of that memory where you get like better texture quality than a Series S game. And I find that exciting. I like that.
Yeah. I think I would guard against the Series S comparisons. I'm seeing a lot of, this is like somewhere between PS4 Pro and Series S.
Oh, yeah.
Just be careful on all of that stuff, because you can't apply that rationale to, well, I guess you could in a way to Steam Deck, but, that's using a much higher power budget. I'd just be concerned about sort of setting expectation levels for that. I think ultimately the Switch 2 just needs to address the primary issue with Switch 1, which is that, connected to a living room display, it just doesn't look that good. It's great as a handheld, but it doesn't really work as a home console. Now, maybe DLSS to 1080p or 1440p plus, standard upscaling could actually make a big difference there. And if you look back at my T239 testing, that did seem to be the case there. And it actually has more memory bandwidth seemingly now than what I was projecting there. So, fingers crossed. I think ultimately, though, it is going to be all about the games, and Nintendo just don't disappoint there. It does seem to be the case that the delay was down to the fact that software wasn't ready, which, maybe that's the case. Maybe it's the fact that Switch is still doing incredibly well.
Hey, we can't even call it a delay, really, because nothing was
never
delayed,
officially,
right?
Yeah. So I guess we're waiting on tenterhooks for the next series of leaks on Switch 2, proper leaks this time. But I'm quietly excited about it, Absolutely.
Yeah.
One thing about the leaks that I was that we still don't know a lot about is the screen. There was a lot in the leaks that talked about, the fact that we got the memory in there, that's very interesting. But we still don't know a lot about the screen.
Yep.
OLED, VRR, resolution.
Yep.
They're all
Refresh
kind of
rate.
unknowns still. Yeah, refresh rate, right. And, they make tiny screens that are very good these days. So there's an incredible, you can go all the way down to OG Steam Deck quality up to, like VRR OLED quality. It's there's a lot of variability there.
I think ultimately it's a cost thing.
Yeah, I think it is going to be LCD for sure. It's going to be a Samsung LCD, I bet.
And maybe there'll be an OLED model later on, because
that's exactly what I'm thinking. Nintendo loves their hardware revisions, right? And that will be an excuse to roll out a new model. And the OLED, the SWOLED was, the upgrade felt so much larger than it actually was because of the screen.
Yeah.
I just hope that if they're using LCD, LCDs can look okay. I'm very hard on them, but a good LCD can still look pretty awesome. The problem is the original Switch used a very bad LCD. It was not a good quality. And maybe it was a little better maybe than the original Steam Deck, which was one of the worst I've seen in the last decade. But still, I hope that if they go LCD, the LCD is at least of decent quality.
Okay. Obviously, we'll be tracking Switch 2 as and when new details emerge. I do think we're probably going to get an announcement this calendar year with a release next, similar to the 2016-2017 rollout we saw for the original. But who knows at this point? And with that, let's move on to our third news topic. Okay, so this one's quite interesting. Ahead of Computex, Asus has revealed that there's a new ROG Ally. Actually, I spoke to Asus the other day, and they refer to it as ROG.
What?
Yep.
No!
What? You destroyed my world there, Rich.
I know. We've been getting it all wrong.
This entire time.
There's going to be a new Asus ROG Ally. It's called the ROG Ally X.
Why not the Allly? I don't feel any confidence in this anymore.
ROG Ally. The ASUS ROG ALLY.
I do remember being similarly sort of upset when an LG person said an OLED was an OLED.
OLED.
Yeah.
It's like, it would be like discovering that Xbox all this time was actually XBOX.
In fairness, this is in block capitals, though, so, you know, could have gone either way.
Xbox was sometimes written that way, though.
It was the logo, right?
Yeah. Just saying.
Let's talk about the ROG Ally X. It's not a ROG Ally 2 because it's not basically a fundamentally revised design. It's more of a refresh in the way that Steam Deck was with the OLED model, but it's not quite the same.
Do we know if it still eats SD cards?
There has been a redesign made. There was a good article from The Verge about the new ROG Ally X, and they didn't want to claim any kind of thing that was wrong with the SD card, but you know, the whole thing has been redesigned. At least there's a new motherboard, for instance. But anyway, the key points are that, well, it is using the same AMD Ryzen Z1 or Z1, however you want to pronounce it, Extreme APU. The screen,
Extreme.
Yeah, the Extreme. The screen remains the same, 7 inches, 48 to 128 hertz, a VRR display. That's a bit of a disappointment because even in the LCD space, the screen isn't really amazing in terms of color reproduction, stuff like that.
Better than original deck, but
it's better than that, but it's not as good as the OLED by any stretch of the imagination. But VRR really is a game changer for these devices. They're talking about a larger battery. They won't say how much larger it is, just that you know, you're not going to be disappointed, they're saying. So if we talk about the absolute extremes at the moment, that would be the Ayaneo Kun, which has a 75 watt-hour battery. The original Ally only 40 watt-hour. So hopefully it'll be something, you know, big and meaty like that, because obviously the key thing that's an issue with the ROG Ally is the fact that at full pelt you get less than an hour's battery life, which isn't great. Other things they're talking about, well, the thing's going to be heavier because of the larger battery, presumably. You're going to be able to slot in the larger 2280 M2 SSDs. You don't need to use the little dinky ones anymore, which I think is good for upgradability. Yes, the SD card slot has been moved away from the heatsink, so hopefully that won't be an issue. It's also going to be black. They've changed the color.
all right then.
Neither of you guys have really had any experience of the ROG Ally, have you?
I have played on one, yes. 'Cause I know somebody who owns one. I spent an hour or two toying around with it. When the games are running, it actually does feel pretty awesome, right. I must say. And it does feel more potent than the Steam Deck in that regard.
Yeah.
Stuff like VRR is really great. But man, the experience outside of the games, it's not good. Like, it's usable enough, but like the whole appeal of the Steam Deck remains like that Steam OS experience is really good. It's like the ultimate fusion of PC and console gaming into a single, like, you know, OS,
yes.
right? And nobody's managed to get there. And it's like, you just miss the features and like the flexibility and the fluidity of that experience when you play on a Windows based device like this, which is why, like, but I don't know what Asus could really do about that. Right? Like, they're kind of stuck with Windows.
Yeah.
Although, I mean, I guess at the same time, one benefit of Windows is that, you know, Proton's amazing, but it's not perfect, right? There are still compatibility issues with some games. So I suppose the ROG Ally, with a slightly more specs and just like full flexibility on that, could probably run more games. I guess, like it should, right?
The main issue that I have with it is that it is a Windows machine, and you kind of, I mean, I've got my Ally set up here, and the way it's set up is that I've got a USB hub attached because I need a keyboard and mouse.
Right.
Yeah.
To basically set things up and make things okay, and then I can unplug it and then take it away and game on it, which isn't ideal, is it? You've got the Armory Crate, and I'm going to give kudos to Asus here, because they have actually dramatically improved the product since I reviewed it. And when I did that handheld roundup a couple of weeks back, the Ally was still really, really impressive. It was just the battery life was like the worst in class. You kind of need to have it in its 25 watt portable mode, which just chews up the battery life, because 25 watts on the SoC, plus the board, plus the storage, plus the memory, plus the screen, it's more than 40 watts. It's like 45 watts if you're sort of going for it, which is why we're getting sub-hour battery life. But if you move it back to 15 watts, you're getting approximate performance to the Steam Deck, worse in some scenarios, better in others. But ultimately, in that case, if I was working at that power level, I'd prefer to just work on the Steam Deck. Right, it's just a better overall product for that sort of power level. If you want to be playing the likes of Alan Wake 2 and Avatar, you need to have, you need to have that extra performance. Something which is being mooted, which I haven't actually mentioned, it's going to have more memory, and they're being a bit bizarre about how they've described this. It's going to have more than 16 gigabytes of RAM, which is what the current one's got. So I guess the options there are possibly 32 gigs, 24 gigs, possibly. It's tricky. What I will say is that Avatar kind of needs more memory than 16 gigs. Alan Wake 2 doesn't boot on the existing ROG Ally unless you start tweaking VRAM amounts. Because you've got to split that memory between system memory and VRAM. Right. It doesn't even boot. You've got to muck about to get it running. Avatar in particular, it's quite interesting when Oliver looked at it in his latest ray-tracing handhelds video that he couldn't get a consistent 30 FPS on the Ally, whereas I could on the One X Player 2, and I think that's because it had 32 gigs of memory. When you've got that vast amount of memory, you can just say, right, okay, I'm going to give 8 gigs to VRAM and the rest of the system. You could even have 12. So it solves that problem fundamentally. So I'm hoping for a decent memory allocation, because I think that's fundamentally what it will need to get new games actually booting and running well. I think there is a bit of disappointment here that we're not looking at the Strix Point APUs, which kind of says to me that maybe that we're still waiting for that huge performance uplift that would actually justify a second generation Ally. What do you reckon, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, that's from my perspective. I think this is this will probably be a nice iteration depending upon what the battery is. I think that's my key takeaway always from using a handheld when I have, is that I want the battery life to be useful, because I don't want to be hooked up to a wall. Yeah. So I know obviously not everyone uses it that way, but but at the point, so you're getting the better battery life. This is not going to entice users. I think a lot of people got extreme FOMO with the Steam Deck OLED model. They're like, I got this Steam Deck. I bought into it and you betrayed me, Valve. I saw a lot of those posts on Twitter, at least afterward. I could have just waited and gotten an OLED. It's so much better. But this, I don't know. Same screen, bit better battery life. We really have to wait and see what the memory. And I don't know if that's enticing to someone who already has a ROG Ally, but it is better for new time buyers. But at the same time, at the point where the handheld market is right now, yes, you can get your Alan Wakes and your Avatars there to a certain degree on the higher end ones, but it's not always the premier experience and how you'd want to play these games. And I feel like that requires a new batch of hardware. That, like you just said, it's not here and we don't know when it'll be coming at the moment. The Strix stuff, which we talked about, was that last week? That stuff all is very exciting. So I mean, personally, if I were into the handheld market, I would say almost this is still not enough. Maybe wait a little bit longer if you want a Windows handheld. But otherwise, Steam Deck OLED is awesome.
Yes, except you won't be playing the top end games on it.
You will not be playing the top.
But you know, it really does.
Play Herod Halibut on it.
That's the most important thing.
I did that on the plane. It was awesome.
Anyway, Asus ROG, ROG. Asus ROG Ally X. I hope to get a look at that soon because, you know, something else that really sort of hit me when I was doing that handhelds roundup is that these sort of extreme power handhelds, you know, your Lenovo Legion Go's, your A&E Okuns, 1X Player 2s, they are really capable devices, but they are huge. They are gigantic compared to the ROG Ally, which, you know, still fits the bill. I've got it here as a decent handheld, right? And even if this one is going to be slightly heavier than the existing model, I still think it would be a really good device. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. Hopefully get to see it soon.
I kind of like that form factor slightly more than the deck, actually. Like, the deck does feel like really like wide. And the ROG, it somehow just visually looks a little bit more, I don't know, there's something about the layout that just feels better to me.
Yeah, it's a well put together device. And I'm also happy just at the level, as I said, the level of commitment that Asus has put in. You know, I was talking about stuttering issues that I had in the original review period. When I did the handheld roundup, that had gone, but it was still there on the Lenovo Legion Go. So it's quite interesting to see that, you know, Asus put the work in, they fixed the problems, and Armory Crate does continue to improve. So yeah, curious to see what they got coming up. But with that, let's move on to our next topic. Okay, so this one is kind of like, almost feels like yesterday's news right at this point. I mean, everything feels like yesterday's news, bearing in mind the week that we've had. But I'm going to go straight to you on this one, Alex, because Helldivers 2, I'd say it's been a transformative game for Sony's PC fortunes. And yet, last week, they seemed hell-bent on tearing it all down for no real reason whatsoever.
Right.
Yes. Basically,
what do you say?
What was the story there? Essentially, they wanted to add on mandatory enrollment into the PlayStation Network in order to play the game, which wasn't there at launch and had originally been mooted as an optional thing that you can do. So they changed their mind on that. It was going to become a mandatory thing that you had to do to play Helldivers, which in turn meant that people who couldn't register for the PlayStation Network because it wasn't available in their country would have been locked out of the game. And then Sony doubled down by removing the game. I can't believe I'm even saying this. By removing the game from sale to those countries that would have been affected. And then basically all hell broke loose. Would you like to carry on the story?
I think, yeah. So to carry on the story, that went on all on like Friday into the weekend going on to Monday. So it was like this explosive, hilarious thing where we recorded DF Direct and this happened like an hour later.
Yes.
And yeah, as it sometimes happens, because bad news always happens on Friday, right? And and then it carries over to Monday morning and it's immediately rescinded. And the idea now is for the future that you will be able to optionally sign up for PSN, if I'm not mistaken, and you'll maybe get a little bonus of like in-game credits or something like if you sign up for PSN. And there's another continuation to the story actually as of maybe yesterday, where I believe Ghost of Tsushima, which is going to be coming out like next week, they are not going to have mandatory PSN sign up in it or log in for it for the single player component of the game, but there is a multiplayer component that will require PSN sign up. So you can, I mean, the reason why they require it is nebulous, but the reason is because they want you in the PSN network. They want you to be getting trophies. I think that's a big part of it. And that's probably why Helldivers had such a big part of it, because it worked on a technical level complete without PSN crossplay. That is
a good point.
And Helldivers. So I think the technical requirements are actually not really existent. Okay, so that's the situation as it is right now, and it spells a future where PSN is actually going to be a big part of upcoming Sony ports based upon what just happened with Helldivers 2, where they had to walk it back because it was so bad. But Ghost of Tsushima is just another vehicle, and it's going to be differing from port to port depending upon how single player or multiplayer the port is. I do doubt that the next fully single player game that comes to PC, whichever one it may be, will actually require PSN based upon Ghost of Tsushima. But at least for multiplayer titles, you should 100% expect it. I think as a PC player, what Sony tried to do was really, really bad. I personally, I'm not used to it. I don't like it, but a lot of games do require secondary sign-ins for their own thing. Some do not, and I'm always grateful when they do, but it has become like a fact of life on PC that just because a game's on Steam doesn't mean it won't require some EA login, which is one of the more annoying ones, actually, because the launcher also comes with it. But just an in-game one that is one-off and done is actually not bad as long as it's in your country, I feel, and as long as it's part of the advertising for the game on the Steam page. But the idea that they wanted to or just forgot that they already sold the game to people in non-PSN areas or areas where a PSN sign-up is actually kind of an involved process. Maybe it requires government ID or something like that. I feel that is really bad, and they rightfully got torn into for it, and I think that was like the larger crux of it. I think that's a really bad move. I can't believe that was oversight though. Surely they could have known that at launch, that PSN doesn't work in a lot of countries on Steam where you're selling the game.
It just looks inept.
I just the entire situation for me as a modern PC player is, we have to get used to the fact that Steam isn't the only thing, and it's pretty reasonable to get access to extra features in a game to have to use sign-ins. I don't think that's so bad. I think the Larian launcher was another scenario where I thought, okay, I get cross-play support and some extra stuff by using the Larian launcher, but it wasn't really completely necessary. So, I mean, in the end, I'm happy that it's over, and I'm happy that Sony bowed down to it. And I think that just shows the power of Steam as a platform, with the fact that it does have the user review system that obviously has a lot of issues, but the fact that it, people were able to express themselves there, as well as the refund period on Steam, and it being there's a lot more leeway on Steam to refund a game. Actually, the arguing process is better. So I feel like that's really an important part of Steam, and I'm curious to see how Sony deals with it in the future, because they cannot release another TLOU Part 1 and expect to make market share at this point in time, because everyone's just going to refund it, so yeah. I hope so. Everyone just refunds it. But do you think this means that a PlayStation launcher is on the way forward, because they're slowly, integrating a PSN stuff into PC? Is this the next step?
I hope not.
Well, they're doing the overlay, aren't they? The PlayStation overlay. I just think if you're going to do it, you've got to go in and provide the features, right? You want to have cross-play support. I think arguably there's an argument for producing cross-platform ownership as well at that point as well.
Yes.
The concept of buying the same game twice rankles a bit.
Bingo. That's it right there. That is the thing, right? Like, if they do that, then I think people would be like, all right, whatever, I'll, that makes a huge difference. That's why I think people are like, well, Xbox makes you sign into every game on PC, but you also get the cross-buy. Yeah. Always, right? So it kind of like, you kind of shrug and like, that's a very good feature. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's great on Starfield, for example, that I can play it on Xbox and I automatically get the PC version. But more to the point, this doesn't apply to all Microsoft games, by the way. My progress through the game persists across both platforms, which I think is really, really good.
Awesome.
If Sony isn't going to make a handheld, then why shouldn't I be able to do that using the PC version of the game on Steam Deck or ROG Ally? I felt dirty saying that.
Oof.
Anything more to say about Helldivers 2? I mean, it just seemed to be a situation that blew up where Sony just didn't really understand.
It was a mix of legitimate complaints and just people that were there to cause trouble. But I think the valid point here is like they introduced it post-launch, and that's why it didn't work.
Right.
I think if it had been a requirement from day one, it's like people would have not loved it, but it would have just been accepted like every other stupid login you have to do these days. Yeah. But when you take a popular game and say, now you got to log in to some account you maybe don't want, yeah, people aren't going to like that. And it was stupid of them to try it. And they should not, if they insist on these logins being there, they can't do it this way. This is the wrong way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, next news topic of the week. This actually happened again Friday last when we'd actually finished filming the prior direct. But Ninja Theory and Microsoft put out the recommended PC specifications for Hellblade 2. And as is the tradition, I like to get Alex to comment on them. So Alex, could you please comment on them?
Okay, so the first thing I want to point out is that there is some descriptive nature of this in here due to the bottom note about essentially upscaling being a recommendation for targeting higher frame rates of like 60 FPS.
Right.
That is, I think, a key thing, as a lot of these system specs that come out don't often actually say what they're targeting in terms of frame rate, and I feel that is bad, and it just left nebulous. And it also goes to show that based upon that we're looking at native resolution here from the description. Then the description essentially of 1440p seems to me, based upon how I read this, to be 30 FPS at native 1440p, probably with TSR native 100%. And then achieving 30 FPS at like the high spec, for example. All kind of reasonable at that point in time, because if you look at modern UE5 using like hardware RT in the epic mode, which is maybe what high is, it's really hard to know because they're not lining up with the typical naming nomenclature there of what Unreal has. That it seems like a 3080, for example, like I think that makes a bit of sense for an internal resolution.
Yep.
That all sounds reasonable to me. The thing that I really take issue with is the way they put the Intel chips on here. I don't think they make any sense.
In what way?
I don't know. Rich?
Oh, you're talking about the GPUs?
The GPUs, the Intel GPUs. Did you see that?
Yeah. So basically, the A580, which is the lowest Intel gaming GPU I would recommend, I guess. It seems to be going over both the minimum and medium. Yeah. Which is slightly odd because it's paired with GPUs that are considerably, I guess, certainly in the medium space, considerably more powerful.
And also above that, though, I think this is the second time I think we've seen most recently where Intel GPUs are put on there, but I'm not sure if they're actually achieving the same. They're put on there from like this is where it fits in the stack perspective, but they're not put on there from like a performance perspective. And I think we've seen this in the past before where, yes, they're covering all their bases here, and it's very great. It's nice that they put any Intel chips on, GPUs on here at all, but I don't think it actually covers the real performance you should expect, especially in comparison to the GPUs that they're putting it next to, which are way better. The
concept of an A770 being up there with a 3080 and a 6800
is absurd.
XT is hilarious.
It is not at all in anywhere near the same level of performance.
Yeah, no sort of frame rate target for these specs is also a bit of a red flag for me.
Yes.
You expect 30 FPS because that's what it's like running on consoles, and it kind of makes sense at that point.
Yeah, it does make sense. Another thing I'm curious about is that the game is apparently going to be forced aspect ratio on Xbox. Kind of like the Order 1886, based upon everything we know at this point. What is aspect ratio like on PC? Does the game default to a 21:9 aspect ratio like it does on console? Weird. really weird because your monitor is, your monitor, and that's like on PC, like defaulting aspect ratio bars, even for a 16:9 experience, is like so. I can't even think of a game off the top of my head that would do that. John, I don't think so. I can't even think of a single one.
The Evil Within. The original one.
Yes, but that was such a bad port. My goodness. Like that is one where like people were just like didn't. And the best part about the Evil Within is it was still rendering the area underneath the black bars.
Oh yeah,
they were a post process. So this wouldn't do that. I'm presuming because they want to. They're more competent developers than that original thing. Okay, so that is all. There's a lot of nebulous stuff here. I don't understand actually whether or not it's going to be 21:9 forced. We assume 30 FPS. I think there's another positive thing to read out of this is actually the VRAM being a separate category here. One thing I really like about UE5 is yes, I've had issues with CPU performance and stuttering for a variety of things, but it seems to be ridiculously VRAM efficient, especially in comparison to other titles where, like I look at The Last of Us and I'm just like, what am I getting here for the VRAM cost? Whereas with the UE5 title, it's like, you get ray tracing. You
the
get
Last
virtual
of Us
texture.
turned out to be the remaining memory modules that haven't been filled.
Yes. So here, very curious about that. Another thing that is a big question mark is UE5 titles can struggle to get above 30 FPS reasonably on like good, reasonable CPU hardware at times. This game is targeting 30 FPS on Xbox Series X. It could have potentially a very hard time on PC without frame generation to getting like a good clean above 60 FPS even, or even a good 60 FPS, which is the one thing I fear about this and which could lead to it having a very bad reputation when it comes out, because people, regardless of how realistic these expectations are, if they don't get like a good clean 60 in a game, the Steam reviews are going to be awful.
Right.
So there's a lot that I'm a little bit worried about as a result of this, but I think these specs, in comparison to others I've seen in the past, they are a little bit better. The one thing that, as always, specs don't mean too much in the end because they are not so well put together always. And as a result, I highly suggest everyone wait to look at reviews from places like Computer Base, or wait for the initial like buyers to say something about the game, or wait for us for our video covering it as well too, where we'll try and give you a better idea of this than what the specs will give out. Because right now you have a general idea, but it's still not a complete picture.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of issues I've got. First of all, in terms of the CPU side of things, when you don't know the frame rate you're targeting, these recommendations on the CPU side are kind of suboptimal, to say the least, because when you've got like a 3080, you're not really planning on playing this game at 30 FPS, are you? You might be able to do 1440p at native resolution, but arguably you would be using DLSS to get to 60, and in that case you still need a pretty potent CPU. So what CPU do I need for 60 FPS? I don't know, is the short answer. I can kind of extrapolate the GPU side of things based on what they're saying here, because I can factor in stuff like frame generation and spatial upscaling as well, but I don't really know on the CPU side. What we are looking at on the GPU side looks to be if I think Oliver was talking about resolutions on Series X of like circa like 1200p to 1440p, maybe lower than that actually, thinking about it, because it's actually letterboxed. So this actually, seems to fit entirely in line with our sort of expectations of what a console can do. Assuming DRS in there, you're basically talking about a sort of hybrid of the GPU selection of of medium and recommended there. So that kind of makes sense. But beyond that, yes, the VRAM side of things does look very, very promising. And if you've got frame generation in there as well, it's going to be good. Beyond that, though, I don't know. We have to wait and see. Yeah. It's going to come down to the quality of the port, and I hope it's good. I really do.
Yeah, the one thing that I do laugh about here a little bit, though, looking at it, because you just called out the CPU stuff, and I did question whether or not this could be a game that is really hard to get 60 FPS in. It is a little bit amusing to see the difference between high at 4K and high at 1440p. Even though this is just a resolution change, they're describing a much better processor, a 10700K versus 126. Yeah, this is a funny thing that happens in specs where they just like keep upping them, even though they're just changing resolution, which usually resolution is rather CPU agnostic in most games. So that is amusing, to say the least. I would love for some developer to contact me before they put out their specs, because I think I could help them. They probably have a large testing room with a lot of PC components, and they probably have enough data out there to put out something that is even more informative than what they end up putting out. So, I would love for a developer, if you're out there and you're watching this, please send me an email. I can do it completely anonymously. I don't need to know anything, but I can maybe help you put out more informative recommended or minimum specifications.
But ultimately, resolution and frame rate targets for your recommended kit is
a big part.
It's a big part of it, and it's not here, which is a bit disappointing. But yeah, I do you just sort of invited everyone to slide into your DMs there, Alex.
Yeah, I mean, I
talking
don't know
hardcore
if I have public DMs anymore. Yeah, send me your hardcore specs. Alex, you haven't responded to my hardcore specs.
Hardcore specs in bio.
Yeah, oh my God. Oh, that's good, Rich. That's good.
Let's move on from that. I'll leave on a high. Let's move on. Final news story of the week. John, you want to talk about Sandland because it's 4K 60 and you're loving it.
Yeah, I picked this up in the US, and when I came back, and I was super jet lagged upon return, so I spent a couple nights playing games until very early in the morning as a result. And so I've been playing this for a good chunk of hours, and I really like this game. It feels, I've said this before on some modern games like Stellar Blade, but it kind of has that, it feels a bit old school in terms of design, where it does a bunch of different things, but it's not trying to be the master of any of them. And it just kind of becomes this cool story-driven action variety game. It's based on the Akira Toriyama manga from like the year 2000, I guess, of the same name. And Namco's doing this whole like media property thing. They got the game, they created an anime and all that. But it's basically it takes place in this world that's kind of been decimated through war and the stuff that's happening in our real world right now. And the whole world's basically turned into like a desert that's devoid of water, and everybody's trying to find whatever water they can get and just survive. It's this big, giant sand land, as the name implies, the desert, basically. And you play as the role of, like, I guess, Lucifer's son, which is fantastic, because there's demons populating this world, by the way. And the story kicks off with basically like this human sheriff basically coming to the demons, which they normally wouldn't do, and asking for help reaching a supposed like promised place within the land where water still flows. And after he asks his dad, Lucifer, if he can go on an adventure with a human, in a very comical way, they go off and set out into the desert, and it becomes sort of this mix of, there's exploration, there's dialogue stuff, there's stealth sequences, there's tons of vehicle action.
This sounds like, dungeons. Oh my God, the PS2 game, because all the mixing of genre.
It's so that. And none of them go so deep. Like, there is some leveling up and parts changes, and you can like modify your vehicles and all that, but like, it doesn't feel like the modern game of where there's like a billion meters to fill and you have to like do all these things. And it's just like, go out there and have a good time. And the combat feels like actually rolling around in the tanks and vehicles and shooting stuff kind of reminds me of like classic Halo, where it's just like, because you can hop out at any point and run around on foot and do things, and you hop back in and you're driving around shooting dudes. You got your cannon and you got your chain gun. It just feels great and it's fun, but really it's just like the personality of the characters, the dialogue between them, and just like the scenarios you're in. It's all like really engaging stuff. And it weirdly also kind of reminded me of the original Mega Man Legends, Rockman Dash, which I'm a big fan of, where it's that same kind of ragtag crew, in this sort of like desolate world. But rather than being in a world covered in endless water, it's endless sand. So it has that same kind of vibe going on.
Sounds cool.
I don't know. And I really like it. I'm having fun. And I am playing I got the physical disc version on PS5. I'm playing that. It is indeed 4K 60. It's an Unreal Engine 4 game, but like has a very unique style to it. And they are using Enlighten, interestingly enough, for their global illumination solution. And, you know, red sand, like and red rock with like brown sand everywhere and the sun beating down. There's a ton of indirect illumination that just looks awesome. And it actually is very, very attractive, which I'm digging a lot. So that's cool. And it runs like a dream. It's pretty much perfect frame rate.
Nice.
There's a couple little dips here and there when like alpha particles fill the screen at the wrong moment, but by and large, it's just locked 60 FPS, super clean, looks great. My only disappointment is I asked online, like I should have bought it on Xbox. Basically, I screwed up by getting it on PS5 because I wanted to play the game fully in Japanese, just as I've been doing for all games lately, just to like kind of continue to study and push myself. And this one only has Japanese voices on PS5. You cannot change the text language, which sucks. But apparently on Xbox you can. So this is a problem with Sony stupid, like the way they do regional stuff where you're kind of like locked out of that. But although it's not always the case, it's also kind of a Namco thing. Apparently Namco is notorious for this because like I played through Grand Blue Fantasy, which is awesome, on PS5, and I have the European version of that, and that you're able to switch it all the way over to Japanese, which is great. I don't think this is going to be a problem for most people. Let's be clear, but it is something I wanted to point out since it only applies to the Xbox version that it has this full language support. Okay. But still,
I have to say a little something here. John's praise is great on the console version there, but I was double checking this because I wanted to check. This is a UE game.
It's gonna have,
and I went to the Steam community discussion.
I know what you're gonna find.
I saw a lot of positive. The thing is, I saw a ton of positive. like RIP. Like great reviews for the game. It's great. But then I go to the Steam discussion, and one of the topics is called Stutterland, and it's the one with one of the most. And I think I saw a great post here from someone named Mimic, where it just says the word pain. So I agree with Mimic. This is a UE game, apparently, that does not precompile any shaders. And apparently every single time you see something new in the open world, when you drive over to it, you will see a stutter or hitch. So,
I can speak to this, Alex.
Oh, no.
Because I played the demo on PC.
Gosh.
And it was horrible. It was horrible. It's exactly as they describe. It's pure stutter. Like, it's some of the worst stutter I've ever seen in a shipping product. It reminds me, it's maybe not as bad, but it kind of reminded me a little bit of when we got Immortals of Avium pre-release before they implemented shader compilation.
Oh no.
And it was just remember that? It was hilariously bad. It's kind of like that, where it just feels like they did nothing. So yeah, I figured that the full version would improve that, but if you're saying that's not the case.
I mean, well, let's see here. I need to scroll to the end of the thread. It's a very long thread, but I mean, most likely the fact that a demo doesn't have it, it's who knows. But at least buyer beware. Perhaps give it a check and see.
This seems to be a case where if you have one of the consoles, you should probably just buy it there if you want to play it, because at least
it's guaranteed.
PS5 is like perfect basically, and from what I've heard, Xbox Series X is also just as good. So
okay. Good stuff. Well, highly recommended there from John. So
maybe not for everyone, but I like it.
Okay.
It's quirky. It's fun. It's beautiful.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Let's move on now to supporter Q&A, which is, of course, the part of the show where every week we ask our supporters for questions they'd like to ask us for inclusion in the show. We can't answer all of them because there's so many. We choose the best, or rather the ones we're best equipped to answer. But I'll tell you what, this week there weren't actually a huge amount of questions because there's probably about 60 odd posts from people just extremely angry with Microsoft. So yeah, I actually went back to last week's show and picked out a couple just for a bit more variety. it was that bad. Anyway, this one from Alexander Seidel should be fairly simple to address. Do you think Switch 2 will still have to be slotted into a base unit to play on the TV? Or is it possible that it might come with the option to just connect wirelessly, basically as a Switch/Wii U hybrid? This is taking into account the rock-solid wireless connection to Wii U that went the other way around, which you've mentioned, if I remember correctly. Fairly simple to answer this one, right, John?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would be cool, but I mean, I guess they're not going to do the wireless connectivity. I was going to say, like, there are TVs that I've used and monitors I've used where you just like plug the the Switch gamepad direct. I don't mean gamepad. I mean the Switch itself. I know what you mean on the brain. Where you can plug the Switch unit itself directly into the USB-C port on the display, and it just works docked, which is cool. But it's not wireless, obviously, and I don't think it's going to happen.
Okay. Yeah, I think ultimately the technical reason's fairly straightforward. Well, there's several technical reasons. First of all, the Wii U actually had, dare I say it, bespoke hardware which dealt with the whole wireless connection thing. It was like a secondary wireless system within the console that dealt exclusively with the gamepad. So you're doubling up on Wi-Fi stuff there. And it's something that's just adds to the bill of materials. And ultimately, it's a lot more expensive than making a dock, and also a lot less reliable one way or another, because, wireless is never going to be as rock solid as just a straight wired connection. So yeah, fairly simple question to answer there. It's an interesting idea, though, this idea of having like a hybrid console that is actually sort of like a wireless transmitter as well. But yeah, the economics just don't make sense. Although, it is kind of sad in a way that the technology in the Wii U never really went anywhere, because it was actually really good.
It is sad.
It was good.
Really
it was
impressive.
Also key to something like Mario Maker.
Yeah,
which
sure.
was never quite the same on Switch.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, yeah. And, we've seen stuff like the PlayStation Portal, which, obviously it's targeting a higher resolution, but latency and I'd say image integrity just aren't as good as the Wii U, which is astonishing when you think about like the decade difference between them. But anyway, that's that. Let's move on to the next question. This one from I Chew Frames. Hello, founders. I often observe a recurring argument among gamers that video cards with less than 16 gigs of VRAM will soon become obsolete. This viewpoint is particularly aimed at cards with 8 to 10 gigs of VRAM, with many advising against their purchase to avoid a lack of future-proofing and redundancy in just a couple of years. However, with current PC games like Hellblade 2 recommending 8 gigs of VRAM for high settings 1440p, there appears to be little evidence supporting this claim. Moreover, with technologies such as DLSS, we're seeing more value from lower VRAM capacities than ever before. NVIDIA in particular has demonstrated that it's not how much VRAM you have, but what you do with it that counts. What's your take on the longevity of these types of video cards?
Wow.
Yeah, Alex, I'll go straight to you on this one, but I'd say it's like, that's an interesting argument, but it could go both ways, really, can't it?
It is a really big both ways thing. I just want to say historically, like, I did not like the 3070 launching with 8 gigs. I was also not happy with the 4060 launching with 8 gigs. I really think them going back from 12 on the 3060 to 8 on the 4060 is a mistake. And it's mainly because as bad as it sounds, I don't trust developers to do good enough PC ports to allow for great experiences on cards with 8 gigabytes always. That doesn't mean you're going to get a bad experience if you have an 8 gigabyte card, but it's not guaranteed. And it's nice to have your hardware guarantee good experiences in spite of what the developers do as much as possible, I feel, just as a PC gamer. So you're avoiding the headache of having to refund a game or play it in a subpar way, even though you spent, you gave out more than 300 USD for your GPU, perhaps. So I feel like that's why I'm always a little bit, that I wasn't happy about 8 gigabytes back then, and with the 4060 as well too. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't expect better. And I think that's the point when we get to titles like T-Lu Part 1, where I just said, this is completely unsatisfactory for an 8 gigabyte GPU. This should be way better. and I say it and the review comes out, and I did the same with my gosh, Sporefoken, and you should do that every single time that happens, because there obviously 8 gigabytes of memory should at least yield results that are visually pleasing based upon the settings that are allowed in a game. And a point that I think a lot of people that are saying only 16 gigabytes are valid, I think that's just a bit, how do you say it, like unrealistic from the expectation of like that games should have settings that are tunable. We should expect tunable settings in a PC game. It shouldn't just be everything. There's only one setting and it's very high. We should really expect that there's a gradation of settings or a good automatic setting, like we see in Avatar, for example, for texture quality, that gives you a quality experience if you go down the notch a little bit, or if your card doesn't have enough VRAM. And that's not once again, that's all stuff that's not a guarantee. So I think you should expect more in general from PC ports, but it is much better from the consumer's perspective to expect the worst, because PC is a platform that developers just do not care nearly enough about at times. And so you should just prepare with that with your hardware purchase to a certain degree. That's why I recommend, certain CPUs in the past, why I would recommend a minimum of 16 gigabytes of system memory. These are all things that happened. There was a time when you could have still bought like a dual core CPU, but you really should have gone higher. These things all happen transitionally over time. And I think 8 gigabytes is right on the cusp of viability at the moment due to the pressures of game development. And reasonably, you should expect much better, but you should just prepare for it. Okay. With that being said, I do think there will be issues in the future with scaling on 8 gigabytes on certain GPUs. We've already seen it. Rich has talked about it in a couple of videos where you've recently saw it, right? With the 4060, all these comparisons to the PS5. Didn't you recently see
Yeah,
that?
I mean, The Last of Us was the classic example where you just lost a huge chunk of performance compared to the 3060, even though it's actually the faster card, because, it's shuttling data in and out of PCIe buses to run the higher quality textures. My take on this is really, really straightforward. First of all, I think, if you're a mainstream PC user, you kind of want to have parity with what the consoles are doing. And typically, a console game will have like maybe 10 gigs of memory for graphics and a couple of gigs for, the game. It can be a lot more efficient, but you've got to kind of double up on memory in the PC space because of the split pools that you've got there. I think you do need 16 gigs of memory minimum now for system, and for graphics, well, I'd be looking at 12 gigs just to make things comfortable without having to worry about, moving things down to medium, which can look poor, can look decent depending.
Yes.
The Hellblade thing, and Alex has already explained that Unreal Engine is particularly great at memory management, which is awesome, but not every game is. Secondly, I do think that, a lot of people do like to have, regardless of what we say about optimized settings, they do like to whack things up to ultra. And I think the argument for ultra settings is that you want to have games that still look great and actually take advantage of the hardware of tomorrow. And, ultra setting textures, maybe it would require a 16 gig GPU. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. You want games to scale up as well as down, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that's the bottom line.
In my rig over here, I went with 64 megabytes of RAM, and I went for the 12 megabyte Voodoo 2 rather than the 8. And I figured 8 was not quite enough.
Yeah,
in the future,
you're just future-proofing there, John.
Yeah,
Yes.
you could at least run Unreal. So
exactly.
That's the point.
Exactly. Yeah. Fair enough. I think that answers that one. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Kellen Sandifer. Should the next-gen consoles focus more on RAM pool size, 40 gigabytes or 64 gigabytes of memory and memory bandwidth, as that seems to be the big issue with Series S, instead of the latest, greatest CPU and GPU? I think the problem we got there is that memory costs are not dramatically dropping, which is kind of why the current generation of consoles have only got like double the memory of the last ones. because, it's just economically unviable to keep doubling up and doubling up and doubling up. And ultimately, you need to be looking at software to be doing more of the heavy lifting, and also storage, where we have seen like a proper generational leap. So I think obviously there's probably going to be more memory in the next generation consoles, particularly on the Xbox side, if they're looking to actually make it more of a PC. I wonder if they've thought about that.
Right.
But you can't just keep on doubling and doubling. You've got to take a more holistic approach to console design, and similar to the way that you're probably not going to be seeing double the GPU performance on PS5 Pro versus PS5. They're making up for it with software-driven techniques like PSSR upscaling. Anything to add to that one, Alex?
Yeah, from my perspective too, video memory has to be filled by something, and that's a dumb statement. I love it. But here I'm talking about they have to have the design, like the artists, to be making enough unique objects to actually require a certain amount of video memory, and the art in games is so, it's like the constrained working hours right now is all about like you need 5 years of AAA artists and 80 of them to make Call of Duty or something like that. I don't know. Just like it requires a lot of art working hours to make all the textures and the models and whatnot. And so there's a limit currently, I think, in the production side to actually filling VRAM in a meaningful way. And I think there's going to be we're going to be in a stagnation period for the next decade of how much VRAM after a certain point is really necessary for a game. I think after 16, actually, you're looking at okay, what are we filling all this memory with at this point in time? And, more static solutions. We have a 3 million static particle simulation that only moves in a certain way when you look at it, and it's just in memory for a minute. I don't know. I think development's going to change a bit to be a bit more dynamic, to use more procedural systems. I think UE5 is a great look at the future for that, about limiting how much VRAM is necessary for extremely high quality by reusing things and virtualizing things. So I think actually VRAM after a certain point in time, and specifically on consoles where they have more control over this, they don't need to double up to 48. And excluding whatever the next Xbox is, we don't really know there. But I think for the next PS6, they don't need 64 gigs or 48 gigs of memory to have a compelling device.
You do need the right balance, though, and I think the questioner Kellen here has got the right idea with Series S. It's they cut too hard, and the memory bus in particular was problematic. And the amount of memory meant that features that Series X had, like ray tracing, were far less likely to appear on Series S. So it's about balance, really. I think fundamentally. Anything to add to that, John?
No, not really.
Fair enough. Good. Let's crack
on. We've been at this a long time.
Yeah, we've got to crack on. Next question. This one from 1040 STF. Regarding a more PC-like future for Xbox, there's a topic I almost never hear of on Digital Foundry: keyboard and mouse support on consoles. Since this gen, it's pretty awesome. All Call of Duties have it. All Night Dive remasters have it. Cyberpunk 2077 has it, but no Sony first-party games have it to my knowledge, which is weird as accessibility features seem to be one of their priorities. The most paradoxical situation is that id Software never support keyboard and mouse, but as Night Dive does, Doom 64, the only Doom created for a pad, is the only Doom game to support those on consoles. Recently, I got a Razer Turret, which is a keyboard and mouse for couch gaming, labelled as for Xbox, but that works fine for PC and PS5, and it's pretty awesome. Do you sometimes use mouse and keyboard with consoles? Do you think we might see support extended to get consoles closer to PCs? John?
No.
Yeah.
I think most people do not use it. I certainly do not, simply because it really comes down to the form factor of your setup, right? If you're playing PS5 at a desk, then sure, why not? Especially if it's easy to just move your PC stuff over to a console. But if you have it like just set up in like a TV stand in a living room or wherever you play your games, it's not that convenient or comfortable to use mouse and keyboard, I feel. So I think most people won't do it, and I don't think it's going to become that common in games either. But I respect and love that there are games which do offer that, because there are also those people that play their PS5s, Xboxes, whatever, like at a desk.
Right.
So it's good for them.
Yeah, but it is somewhat
It's niche.
niche. Yeah, Alex.
It is for sure niche, but I think the next Xbox will allow it a lot based upon everything John just said in this episode about, the PC-esque future for Xbox. I think the next Xbox it'll be a default thing, and all games will then necessarily support it at that point in time almost.
Right.
So I expect that. But for PS6, or anything, I don't expect it at all. And I think games are also that are multi-platform enough, like they design around it so that is not usually necessary. You don't get a lot of RTS games or whatever on console anyways, but like those games where it's like you just mentioned Doom Eternal here. And I thought, like, how the heck do people beat Doom Eternal on Ultra Nightmare on like a stick and a gamepad? I was like, how do you even do that? Then I thought, like, wait a minute, the game already has design stuff in it to allow that to occur. Like the game, when you switch weapons, it goes into slow-mo. And it uses a weapon wheel. Like there's aspects of gaming that still, like, it's not perfect, but you can still do a lot on a gamepad if the gameplay accommodates for it. So I don't think it's going to get any more popular than it currently is, at least.
Next question, this one from Alex R. Davies. A GDC sneak peek into Unreal Engine 5.4 appeared on YouTube last week. Some intriguing tools and comments. They mentioned rendering is about twice the speed of Unreal 5.0. How feasible is it for a dev to update an already released game to 5.4, fix snags and republish with those improvements? Would that be days of work or weeks? And how much impact would halving the rendering time specifically have on frame rates or pacing when those also depend on ray tracing, DLSS, and all sorts of other inputs? So I'll put this one down here, Alex, because you've literally just done a video on Unreal Engine 5.4, and you did actually recompile a 5.0 project, the City Sample demo, onto 5.4, and you reaped the benefits of the various enhancements that 5.4 brought to the table. So does that scale up to a game, or is it more tricky? I suspect it's more tricky.
It is indeed trickier than that. And a good example of that is just 2 weeks ago when I had on my PC, I compiled 5.4 for myself as the engine on my PC, but the city sample, essentially the large art code depository that you can download, it wasn't compiling right for 5.4 if you tried to open the project up in 5.4. It had a lot of conflicts, it had a lot of plugins that didn't work. And so I couldn't finish off my initial video project idea of looking at 5.4 because I would have to spend a lot of time like looking through and seeing what the conflicts are. And I don't have time to do that as just like a normal person trying to make a 1 week video. The thing is, it took a lot of probably working hours behind the scene from Epic's side to prep the city sample project to be working in Unreal Engine 5.4.
Right.
And they updated it, and you can download it now, and it compiles completely fine as a project for 5.4 if you use their system for it. For a larger project that has people already working on it and maybe even has more specific things that are not Unreal in it, like custom things, the merging to make it work could even be more labor intensive than that. Then also you have to think about the fact that you have to like recertify the game. Is it worth it? On consoles, like there's a lot, and they have to do the whole publishing stuff again. You have to QA it again to make sure that there's a lot of stuff that's not broken. I don't think it's very reasonable, even though I'd love it from a performance perspective, for people to do that for projects, especially like older UE5 stuff that we've seen. I've talked about a couple of them on the channel. Some of them have really rough aspects as a result of being earlier versions of UE5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, some projects will get updated, but it's not it's not a trivial undertaking, clearly. Okay, let's move on. This question from Leftist Hominid, it's a variation on a theme from the past. If Richard Ledbetter from 2029 came through a time warp and told you that Intel Arc had overtaken AMD in discrete GPU market share, but had no way of showing proof, and then went back to his own time, would you believe him? So, John, I think what Leftist Comedy here is basically saying is, do you think in the fullness of time, Intel will overtake AMD as the number 2 discrete GPU maker, but has sort of posited it within this bizarre scenario that we have seen before?
This Terminator scenario here.
I would not believe it unless you from the future came to tell me, in which case I would believe it.
Okay.
The question is, does this time travel machine require you to be found naked in a parking lot?
Yes.
Because in that case, I would totally believe Rich.
Rich would have already went up to a bar or something and stolen the clothes,
Right.
and a motorcycle.
Well, it kind of suggests that there's actually a more human-like presence that's also gone back in time to either A, stop me from doing this, or B, to tell everyone that AMD is still number 2 or perhaps even number 1 in discrete GPU market share.
Gosh.
Yes. Moving back into the realms of possibility, though, the concept of Intel being a number 2 in the marketplace really depends on how aggressive they're going to be in terms of, first of all, delivery, and secondly, in pricing, because there is definitely a certain vulnerability in AMD's GPU lineup, and their performance certainly. So it is not beyond the realms of possibility that it is possible. Quite why I would want to go back in time and tell you about it. You know, I've got better things to be doing.
Invest now is what Rich from the future says.
Yeah, well, the Rich from the future would be coming back to say, hey, you know, there's this new company, maybe, you know, invest some money in some shares.
Yep.
Why go back from 2029 to, you know, 2024? Why not go back and sort of say, right, this company called Facebook, Google, Tesla, there's Microsoft, there's going to be massive share growth there, and you know, might be a bit more worthy of the time investment, of the effort investment put into time travel. Just sort of having similar thoughts about alternate timelines that may actually result from this meddling in the past.
Oh yeah, my goodness,
it's
just break off right there.
Not great. Let's move on to the next and thankfully final question from Austin Cade. What are your favourite imsims and why is it Prey 2017?
Oh.
Kind of topical.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, what are your favourite immersive simulator games there, John? And is it Prey 2017?
It's one of them. It's up there. I think it's really good. I mean, I always go back to System Shock 2, Deus Ex, of course, quintessentials, although Deus Ex is it's its own kind of thing, I guess. I love this System Shock reboot we got last year. That's incredible.
Coming to console very soon.
Prey 2017 was definitely, it did feel like a spiritual successor to the older System Shock games, which I think we kind of gained knowledge that it may have been that at some point. So it's just really smart. Like the interplay between everything, the systems, the world that they build, everything works so well. The mechanics are interesting and creative. The goo gun or whatever it was called allowed some real outside the box thinking. Like,
yes.
In terms of like how you navigated the map and dealt with problems, which was something super awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's good all around. Really, really well made game. But unfortunately, the advertising was annoying, and the game didn't do that well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alex?
Prey 2017 is pretty up there. I think it's an incredible game. I really like the mimics. I really like the general vibe of the game. I think retro futures are incredibly cool. I'm always really attracted to them. So I think that's a great game, but I also just want to do a shout out to the original Stalker, just because it has a lot of ImSim in it. It's less successful in some areas and more successful in others. But if you want to try something that is also a game that is about building atmosphere and has persistent elements in it, and a variety of ways to tackle a scenario, depending upon which part of the game you're in, then it's a lot of fun. But once again, expect mid 2,000 euro jank. So that's an entirely different proposition. But then again, ImSim games are usually janky. So maybe you're up for it at this point in time. I'm trying to think of a ImSim game that is not kind of janky. Maybe Dishonored is a little bit less janky because they constrain you so much. There's a lot more constraint in Dishonored, I would say. But, usually ImSim games have a lot of jank, but it's the systems that attach you. You don't need stuff like great facial animation in a game or something like that.
Would you say Dishonored 2 especially is one of my favorites, and I was thinking of Thief as well. Somehow those always felt like slightly different, but I guess they really are part of that same space, right?
100%.
Thief may be a little less so, but it's still, to me, it occupies a similar space, and Thief 2 especially is I love it.
I definitely say it, but that's one of those games also where playing it on a modern PC, it's hard to recommend for a lot of people. I think it works well enough, but like people if you just want to buy it from Steam, it's a little harder.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually had it working really well recently. If you turn off all the lights in the room and play it on an OLED screen, it recreates that feeling I used to get from playing on a CRT, where it feels dark. The game does not feel dark on an LCD monitor, and it destroys the atmosphere.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like playing Doom 3 on one.
Yeah, it's horrible.
Okay, well, that's it. That's the final question there for the end of the show. Oof, so if you did enjoy it, please do like, subscribe, share. Ring bells for things that may or may not happen. Store.digitalfoundry.net. Bespoke collection still available. Do check it out. It's a great way to support the team if you're not a supporter, or if indeed you are. And yes, that's it. That is the end of this show, and I think we're all out of power here. So we'll see you.
Yes.
We'll see you next week. And as always, thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry.